have more to say.
Okay. In the statement that the Secretary released this morning, it says that they're calling on the transitional government to secure both chemical and biological weapons. So how are these people, who are they he's calling on? How are these people who haven't even formed a government, how are they going to are they supposed to secure these weapons? And second, would you entertain that in this case, like a UN team mandated by the Security Council will go to Syria and secure these weapons?
So a few things about that. Number one, it is the responsibility of those who are taking the reins of power inside Syria, first and foremost, to secure and destroy any chemical weapons that they find in areas that they control. That's the first answer to the question. And obviously, you have seen HTSC's territory, and it certainly is quite possible that in the territory they've seized, there are chemical weapon stocks. They may not have full inventory of those yet, of course. They've only been in control of Damascus for a couple of days. But that is the first answer to the question. The second answer to it, though, is that there is an emergency session of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons Executive Council that has been called, that will meet this Thursday to address the recent developments on the ground and the current situation on the ground in Syria. And when it comes to this question of inspections and verifications, it is the responsibility of that organization to conduct verification efforts under its mandate. Not any of the member states, not the United States or other states, but the OPCW. So we will await the outcome of that meeting on Thursday to define a path forward. We, of course, have full confidence in the OPCW and its ability to carry out its mission.
Okay, going to the Golan Heights, I'm sure you've seen Netanyahu's statement yesterday. He said the Golan Heights is going to be part of Israel now and forever. Considering that this administration, when there was an attack on Majd al-Shams, I believe like 5 months ago, you called it Northern Israel. So you're really legitimizing, give legitimacy to the Israeli control over it. So how can we believe that this administration, or any administration, we're not going to let Netanyahu go against international law, which we know that's been illegally occupied since 1967.
So I would just say, with respect to the Golan Heights, of course, the United States recognized several years ago control over the Golan Heights. That's just as a factual matter. Now, when it comes to other disputed areas, we have long made clear that we want to see a two-state solution. When you talk to areas that have been under Israeli control since 1967, we want to see the establishment of an independent Palestinian state, and you have seen us take a number of steps to try to advance that possibility, and we'll continue to do that.
Okay, just one thing I want to clarify, just to make sure I heard you correctly. You said that legally the United States can talk to any terrorist group if they want to, if that advances the interests of the U.S., right?
Correct. Just as a legal matter, strictly legal matter. That's different than a policy matter, of course,
sure.
A policy
so
choice.
What stopped you from talking to Hamas directly, since you designated them as a terrorist group, you have a great interest in releasing American hostages instead of going to mediators?
Because we have effective mediators who have much better relationships with Hamas than we do, for obvious reasons, and have the ability to effectively communicate with them. There was never any need for us to have those direct conversations when you have effective mediators like the governments of Qatar and the governments of Egypt.
Yeah. Thank you.
On the Israeli strikes in Syria, did they inform you ahead of time of these?
I don't have any conversations to read out. We need to speak more with them about this before we have anything to say about it.
Would you have expected them to? I mean, in scale, these are very significant. You know, some have made comparisons to the sort of wiping out of the Egyptian Air Force in 1967.
Again, I just don't have anything further to say. We need to have further conversations about them before we comment in detail on the matter.
Can I follow up on the status of the Golan Heights? I'm slightly puzzled with what you just said, because you've said, you know, the Trump administration which recognised control of the Golan, because you said last year on this that as a practical matter, the Golan is important to Israel's security, and these were your words then: as long as Assad is in power in Syria and as long as Iran is present in Syria, there's a significant threat to Israel, and control of the Golan remains of real importance to Israel's security. So has that changed?
So obviously the factual situation has changed, but you do have a situation now where you have a period of instability in Syria. You don't have effective control by a government that we know is committed to peaceful relations with its neighbors. So not the same security threats exist. Obviously, you don't have the Assad regime there, and you have seen Iran's influence inside Syria weaken quite considerably But there still is a security threat. That is a practical matter, which is what I was saying has not changed.
But this isn't. What's the legal determination of the State Department? Do you recognise as a legal matter Israel's control over the Golan?
So that is a decision that was made by the previous administration to recognize the Golan Heights as part of Israel, and there has not been a carry-on legal determination made, or I say contradictory legal determination that's been made in the years since.
With regards to the disengagement zone, I know there's some confusion about whether or not the Israelis have gone even beyond the buffer zone, the disengagement zone, further into Syria. But I mean, there's a chorus of disapproval of this. I mean, the UNDOF, the Secretary General's spokesman has told them to stop. UNDOF informed them ahead of time it would be a violation of the 1974 agreement. You now have Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, all critical allies for you in terms of getting on board the vision that you are trying to lay out for the future of Syria, who have all said this is an attack on Syria's sovereignty, a dangerous development. I mean, what's your position on Israel having invaded that buffer zone?
So I spoke to this yesterday. Nothing has changed since then. What precipitated their move into the buffer zone was the withdrawal of the Syrian armed forces, which, as I said yesterday, creates potentially a vacuum that could be filled by any one of the numerous terrorist organizations that continue to operate inside Syria that have sworn to the destruction of the state of Israel. Israel has said that they deployed their forces into the buffer zone temporarily to prevent such a threat from emerging against the state of Israel and against Israeli civilians. Ultimately, we want to see the 1974 agreement upheld.
I mean, do you not worry this just further erodes the importance and value of international law?
I think it's important that the step that they have taken has remained temporary.
Okay, and I mean, on those Golan, I mean, the Golan Heights, the occupied Golan Heights, is absolutely littered with the remnants of Syrian villages, of homes from 1967 and demolitions that took place. I mean, many thousands of people were expelled or forced to flee. Many of those people will be looking at, what's going on now. You talk about a Syrian process, a Syrian-led future for the people of Syria. I mean, those people had homes and villages back in the occupied Golan Heights. What should they be thinking now? What's the US saying to them?
So I think, Tom, with any number of questions about where things might go in the future, we need to step back and realize that we are 2.5 days since the fall of the regime. And before we start making grand pronouncements about how things are going to proceed in the future, it's important to remember that we are in early days. We are just beginning to have conversations with partners in the region about the path forward and trying to get partners to align around principles that we think are important. And we have not yet seen the Syrian people have the ability to make their voices heard. So before we start to get into too far down the road, I think it's important to let the process play out a little bit further.
I just say that, I mean, you talk about pronouncements, but they will say you've already made a pronouncement about the occupied Golan Heights because you said you recognize Israel's presence there.
It's an action that was taken by the government of the United States years ago with respect to anything over the last few days. I think it's important to let the dust settle a little bit. Yeah.
Just on the OPCW meeting that you mentioned, it's going to be on Thursday.
Yeah.
This may not be a question for you, but does the United States believe that Syria remains a member in good standing of the OPCW? And whether it does or not, will they be represented there?
So
and
it really,
if so, by whom?
That really is a question for the OPCW. It's hard for me to imagine that a country that has used chemical weapons on its own country remains a member in good standing, whether there's some technical membership or not.
They joined in 2013 after the deal that was brokered between John Kerry and Lavrov.
My point remains, whether they were formally expelled from that, I do not know.
I mean,
it's a question for the
OPCW. But do you think that they should be represented? Or that they should have a representative?
I'd have to take that back. And so we're at the position where you're in a transition. I don't know who the representative would even be. I'd have to take that back and consult with others.
So you wouldn't have a problem if the OPCW...
That's not what I said. I said
I
said I need to take it back and consult with
okay.
others. You're right. I'm sorry. I apologize for interrupting your question.
I just want to know if you're okay with the OPCW having a meeting, an emergency meeting about the chemical weapons in Syria, at which Syria is not represented.
I need to take that back and consult with our experts on the OPCW here, of which I am not one. Yeah. Go ahead.
So the Secretary has given his plan or outline of what they would like to see from the Biden administration. How that goes in hand with the plan that the UN might see in the region? How you're coordinating, especially right now with the meetings happening in the Security Council, most of them closed door, because that will bring China and Russia within the conversation.
So these are principles that we have outlined that we think every country ought to be able to support. Now, we're not blind to the fact that Russia has pursued a very different vision when it comes to Syria over the past 13 years. But we will outline these principles in all of our diplomatic engagements, both in the region and in our conversations with our colleagues on the Security Council and other colleagues at the United Nations in New York, as well as UN personnel who operate inside the region. And those will be conversations we'll continue to have over the coming days.
In terms of the situation in the region, is the United States worried that because of the diminish of Hezbollah, the situation that is happening in Syria now, the fall of Assad, Iran will feel more motivated to try to pursue their nuclear program and try to accelerate it?
So I can't speak to the judgments that the regime inside Iran will make. I can say that if I were them, I would look back at the course of action that they have pursued over the last decade plus of trying to support terrorism and further destabilize the region as a strategy that has failed. When you look at their support for proxy groups, they've clearly had a strategy that they were pursuing to try and threaten the state of Israel from outside its borders, to launch repeated terrorist attacks against civilians inside Israel, and of course to launch terrorist attacks against other entities around the region. Israelis have not been the only recipients, of course, of terrorist attacks sponsored by the state of Iran. So I would hope that the government of Iran would look at the failed policy that they have pursued and choose the path of de-escalation and better relations with their neighbors, and not trying to continue to foment instability and support terrorism. I'm under no illusions that they're going to have a change of heart, but I would think that would be the wiser assessment. I can tell you that if they pursue a different nuclear policy, we have made clear that we will not allow the government of Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon.
Just a quick change, a question. The State Department issued a fact sheet on Monday regarding the accountability actions to counter global corruption and human rights abuses for Indonesia. So can you outline the steps that State Department is generally taking in response to human rights violators from Indonesia?
So I'd have to take that back to get you anything more specifically as it goes to Indonesia. I know that we detailed some of the actions in the statement that we put out. I can tell you that we have made clear around the world that the fight against corruption and the promotion of human rights is a top priority for the United States, and it will continue to be. But with respect to specific actions inside Indonesia, I'd have to get you a more detailed answer. Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. I have a couple of questions, Matt. First, what do you think about the Syrian new prime minister that Joulani has appointed? Did someone talk to him, or will someone from the administration call him?
I don't have any comment on his appointment. We have not had any communications with him as of yet.
We started to see on social media some reports of human rights atrocities in the streets of Syria. How are you following these reports?
We're following very closely, and it's why you have heard everyone in this administration, starting with the president on Sunday, emphasize that the protection of civilians must be the paramount priority in the days and weeks ahead. It's something that we will continue to emphasize. It is civilians that have, of course, suffered the brutal horrors of this war over the past 13 years. And as Syria hopefully emerges from this war with a path towards peace going forwards, we will see all of the organizations, all of the various factions inside Syria unite around the principle that they ought to protect civilians.
Reports said that former Syrian officials have fled Syria to Lebanon. What's your view on that?
I don't have any comment on whether that's true or not, nor do I have a comment on it. Of course, any official who is well, I'll leave it at that.
Do you have any updates on the Russian presence in Syria, and did the U.S. help Russia evacuate their positions in Hasaka and other areas in Syria?
I am not aware of any assistance by the United States to Russia, and I don't have any assessment of the current disposition of their military capabilities inside.
And finally, is the U.S. planning to reopen the U.S. embassy in Damascus?
So it's not something we have immediate plans to do, but we have made clear the steps that we want to see the government of Syria take. And as the secretary said in his statement, should we see a process that follows those principles, we are prepared to recognize a Syrian government that does so. And of course, that is the opening of an embassy is the type of step that would follow such a recognition.
Thank you.
Yeah, Alex.
Thank you, Matt. A couple of questions on Ukraine first. Can you give us more details about today's agreement to provide 20 billion loan to Ukraine? I think US aid guaranteed. None of it will go as military support as initially expected.
I'd have to take back and get you more details. This is something that was contained in the Supplemental Appropriations Act. You know, there was a wide variety of assistance that we were able to provide through that act, some military assistance, some direct economic support. Some of those were in the form of loans. Some of them were in the forms of loans that could be forgiven. So with respect to this specific tranche of support, I have to take it back and get you some information.
Thanks so much. Moving to a sanctions question,
Yeah.
both Matt's question and Celia's question. Yesterday, you guys announced this Magnitsky sanctions, and which is actually backed by the U.S. bipartisan tool to use, did not really include many countries, Azerbaijan, Georgia, many of the countries I mentioned yesterday's and today's award ceremonies. And today you're announcing, as Matt mentioned, new policy that will establish a new set of visa restrictions. What is your strategy here? You guys are just going to leave in a couple of weeks, hand it to the next administration. Why not using what you already have in hand and supported by both parties and the Congress?
We are using the tools that we have available to us that are supported by both parties, and we also, when we find it appropriate, are developing new tools that we can use, both in the time that's left in for this administration and potentially to the successor administration.
And I know you don't want to talk about preview sanctions that you have not announced yet, but I want to ask you about a decision that you have not made on Ukraine, on Georgia. The man who is behind everything we have seen during the past couple of months, let alone past 13 days, has not been punished yet. Why you haven't punished Mr. Ivanishvili yet?
So I am, as you know, because you mentioned it in the preview to your question, I'm not going to talk about any potential sanctions that we will impose on Georgian officials or individuals inside the country of Georgia. We have made clear that we have deep concern with the change in direction that the government of Georgia has taken. You saw a statement from the secretary last week where he made clear that we are going to use all of the tools at our disposal to hold Georgia accountable for those steps, including rolling out new sanctions. As to what those are and who they will target, you're going to have to wait till we announce them, Alex.
So?
You're going to have to wait till we announce them.
On Azerbaijan, thanks so much. On Azerbaijan, the secretary today addressed the case of Rifat Safarov. Vedant also last week mentioned his case. Gentleman was supposed to be here for today's award ceremony, got arrested. But there are multiple arrests that have been taking place since last week. Maidan TV reporters, like 6 new journalists, have been arrested, and then leading Azerbaijan analysts and civil rights activists also got arrested on Sunday. Do you have any reaction to the latest arrests?
So we have been made quite clear to the government of Georgia, and you've heard me speak. The government of Azerbaijan. You've heard me speak to it from this podium. Our serious concern about human rights abuses inside Azerbaijan. You've heard us speak to specific cases, and you will see us continue to speak to specific cases. In fact, you'll hear more from us later today about Azerbaijan.
Beyond speaking up.
You'll hear more from us later today about Azerbaijan. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. You have sanctioned Jolani for his actions in the past in Iraq and Syria. So with the new situation in Syria, are you going to pardon him or still calling accountability for?
Are we going to
pardon him or
pardon him?
Yeah, or
pardon who?
Jolani, or still calling
I don't think
accountability? You still calling accountability for his actions in the past?
So we of course support accountability, but when it comes to moving forward, we are going to judge all of the parties in Syria by their actions in the past, but also the actions that they take in the coming weeks and days.
Okay. And one more question on Northeast Syria. Democratic Autonomous Administration in Northeast Syria stated that a Turkish aircraft targeted Tishrin Dam in Manbij today, so which led the dam out of service and threatening the area with flooding. The administration is calling you and the international coalition to intervene urgently to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe. First, what's your position on the attacking on the civil and also the civilian facilities in Northeast Syria? And secondly, how do you respond to this call from autonomous administration in Northeast Syria?
So I will just make clear our position, and it's what we have been engaged in diplomatic channels as well as military channels over the the past few days, which is we have focused on ensuring the safety and security of respective military forces in northern Syria to ensure that there are no friendly fire incidents. We have long-standing channels set up to do that, and we have made clear to all the relevant parties that what we want to see is no direct conflict between the multitude of armed groups in various parts of the country. We want them all to respect civilians in the areas in which they operate, and we're making that clear to all of the parties.
Has the Secretary Blinken touched that issue with his Turkish counterpart yesterday in the phone?
I'm not beyond the broad strokes I gave at the opening of
have
the.
you been clear to
This is real. Let me finish. But beyond the broad strokes I gave at the opening of the briefing, I'm not going to get into private diplomatic
Have you been clear to
conversations.
Turkey about this issue?
We have made clear our principles to all of the parties that with whom we discuss these matters. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. For inclusive government in Syria, so how differently this time you will engage with HTS along with your partners and allies, as you have very failed experience with inclusive government in Afghanistan, and with that, what is fair reason you have to believe such type of violent extremist groups? Those have very clear sectarian mindset with them. They will lead our nation. They have ability to govern a country.
Look, it's certainly clear that all of the groups inside Syria have different motivations, have different interests. A number of them have very different ideologies, and what we hope that they will all, or what we think they should all come together around, is a peaceful path forward for the Syrian people that respects the various factions and their beliefs and ideologies about how the country ought to move forward. And that's the process that we want to see play out in the coming weeks.
And one on Ambassador Lu recent visit to South Asia. He visited India and Nepal. This is second visit from these 3 months, consecutive 3 months, and we know administration is going to complete its tenure. It is believed these are concluding visits. So from last visit, he excluded Pakistan. This visit, he excluded Bangladesh and Pakistan again. So reason what both countries people believe is that criticism, that is news outlets reporting that there is some involvement.
That his views are what? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Ambassador Lu involvement in toppling of the government or something like that. So just on policy matters, so you change things with the Bangladesh and Pakistan with your diplomatic level.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So with the end of this administration, you clearly downgraded your diplomatic relations. That is very visible from this visit.
We very clearly what?
Diplomatic relations with Bangladesh and Pakistan.
Of course we have diplomatic relations with Bangladesh and
But
Pakistan.
downgraded with the visits like high official is not visiting Bangladesh and Pakistan.
So the Assistant Secretary is in fact an extremely senior official of the United States government, the one with primary responsibility for that area. And you have seen Secretary Blinken meet with the acting Prime Minister of Bangladesh in recent months, and you have seen him meet with senior Pakistani officials. It's very much a priority for this administration. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Today is a death anniversary of a journalist from Pakistan, without whom the journalism history of Pakistan is not complete. His name is Rahmat Shah Afridi, and he was my dad. So my first question is that he stood up against martial law in Pakistan when he started the newspaper. Yesterday, Michael Kugelman and Al Jazeera reported in this past 3 days that there is complete cyber martial law in Pakistan, and Pakistan has complete corrupt leaders who have brought in as a regime. Your thoughts on that?
So I didn't see that report, but of course we have made clear for some time our position when it comes to Pakistan, which is what we want to see the rule of law upheld.
Today, this member of parliament, Ms. Shandana Gulzar, has stated in her briefing, her dad was parliamentarian as well. She said that the people of Pakistan are extremely unhappy with President Biden, and that there is a Pashtun genocide. While referring to Palestinians, she said that the Pashtun genocide is almost going to start. I've mentioned to you this Pashtun. This is very in tribal areas, the Pashtuns are getting killed. In political rallies, Pashtuns are getting killed. Your just thoughts on that?
Look, I make it a practice not to comment on every statement made by members of our own Congress. I'm certainly not going to comment on every statement made by members of legislatures of foreign
Just
governments.
last one, Matt.
Let me
Matt,
well, only because
just
I
one more.
have a couple more to get, and we got to wrap the briefing. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you for taking my question. There was a Nobel Peace Prize ceremony in Oslo today, and I know that President Biden has already issued a statement on October when the Japanese organization of atomic bomb survivors won the Nobel Peace Prize. But do you have any further comment on today's award?
No, I don't have any beyond what the president said in his previous statement. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Matt. Indian Foreign Secretary has visited Bangladesh, and recently both India and Bangladesh have expressed concern on the violent attack on a diplomatic mission of Bangladesh inside India. Do you have a comment on that developments and the increasingly aggressive rhetoric directed towards Bangladesh?
So, look, we want to see all parties resolve their disagreements peacefully.
Thanks, Matt. So you've been talking about process as it pertains to Syria, but as it pertains to reconstruction of Syria, will the U.S. be leading or following the international community in that regard? Will the U.S. be giving money toward the rebuilding of Syria?
I think you are a little bit putting the cart before the horse. We need to see a political process play out here before we get to discussions about reconstruction and who's going to fund it.
And will the administration take any diplomatic or economic action against China for its continued infiltration of U.S. telecommunications infrastructure?
So you have seen the United States take a number of actions to hold accountable China for its malign behavior across a number of different fronts. And I can tell you that we also raise cyber threats and cyber interference in all of our conversations with the Chinese, and we'll continue to do so. But when it comes to any steps, I'm not going to preview them before we take them.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, that will wrap for today.